Hello, students. Give me a moment. Let me pull myself together here, and we will start our show. Alrighty. Greetings, and welcome to the final week of Understanding Privilege and Oppression. And so we're going to culminate today by really looking at what we now can do as social workers as we move forward in our careers and in our work about how do we actually start to do something about the things that we have just learned about. How do we experience, how do we impact, how do we make a difference in terms of what we do now and how we go forth and how we continue to promote social justice. So we'll spend a little time today just kind of looking at some items or some things for you to think about in terms of how you will further this journey for yourselves. So now, some things you need to understand about moving forward. So when we think about the knowledge that we have learned over the past 8 weeks in terms of the reading, some of the research, videos, and different experiences that we've had you do through assignments and so forth, you have some increased knowledge about these systems. So you might be wondering, like, so now what? I have this information. Can be thoroughly depressing on most occasions, but what do I need to do? What difference can you make? Those kind of things. Those might be questions that you might be having at this point. So we're going to have you, as we kind of move through today, is really have to think about some of those things. So, but also just to be aware of some things too, that as you know more, or there's an old Southern saying that when you know better, you do better. And that came out of the deep South, where I grew up as a kid and was told by my elders that all the time. And so the truth still rings true in terms of that. When you do have information and you do have knowledge, then you also have a responsibility to do something with that. So again, just keeping in mind that you have to make a choice at some point. Do I want to step into this arena and make a conscious choice to promote social justice and work on eliminating some of these systems? But know that it's not going to be a free ride. It's going to cost you something. Relationships sometimes suffer. How and where you conduct business. You know, I'm going to continue to conduct and support businesses that discriminate against women openly. Those kind of things, decisions you need to make. And you actually may even lose some relationships. I have had folks that I've done work with years ago that were doing systems change work and anti-racism work, who actually ended up deciding that certain jobs no longer work for them, certain working relationships, as well as certain personal relationships, even in families, had to change based on people's inability to move forward. So those are some things that you may be looking at as you move forward here. So when we think about what kinds of things we can actually do, when we think about micro level or individual level, you can all make the decision to become allies. And allies are folks who actually are looking at becoming much more observant, paying attention to the things that are here on the screen around the unconscious bias and privilege and diversity and inclusion, and also using this particular knowledge in a much more user-friendly way. In your section, your unit section, there is an actual template that I will upload, or have uploaded rather, that talks about what are some of the attributes of being an ally. So you can do that pretty much for any marginalized group that you choose, in terms of just being aware and being conscientious about things that you need to do when you encounter folks who are struggling. So again, an ally, something to think about. Also understanding that there are these microaggressions, and so we hadn't talked about them prior to now, so I just want to do just kind of a brief little introduction, and there's also a handout in your in this section as well that will talk to you about what some of those microaggressions are, what they look like, and things that you can do when you encounter them. So microaggressions are just these statements, actions, verbalizations, or incidents, unintentional or intentional, that indirectly discriminate or communicate hostile, derogatory, negative, prejudicial slights and insults towards a group. So there are a number of and folks experience these all the time. A lot of times they're unintentional. People don't mean to, come across the way that they do, but they're not thoughtful in terms of their interpretations. So I'll give you an example of one that I used to get quite a bit, especially when I started my career in management. And I would do a presentation, or I would do lead a conversation or run a meeting. And inevitably I would get a comment that went like, "Oh my God, you are so articulate." And so while that might seem like an innocent compliment in terms of someone trying to give me kudos for having done a good job in terms of working through a meeting or through a presentation, the reality is that the underlying assumption is that for a Black person, you're very articulate, or for a person in your position, you're articulate, as opposed to, why wouldn't I just normally be an articulate person? I have a degree, I have the job, so why would you assume or be surprised that I can articulate well when this is what I do? So that's just an example of what a microaggression would look like, or has felt like, at least for me personally, in terms of some of the work that I've done over the years. Also, went to a training not very long ago and learned about this particular tool as well. It's called Recovery from White Conditioning. It's based on a 12-step program. You can also put this in your web browser and go to that site and take a look at it. It's pretty interesting in terms of what they do in terms of trying to negate and to learn more about the conditioning that they have experienced in their lives, and trying to deconstruct that so that they can become a greater asset to our entire community. So keeping those things in mind as well. So when we think about ways to actually fight racism every day, there's some things that we can do. We can start to recognize and understand our very own privilege, examine our biases. We all have biases, but really try to make it a concerted effort to understand where this bias originates from. Where did it come from? What's going on here? What drives some of that? Validate experiences of people of color. So when you hear horrific things that have happened, oftentimes we get uncomfortable with other people's pain and suffering. And so it's easier for us to not believe or to discount or to make excuses for what may have happened to them. That's very, very disrespectful to those folks who actually have experienced that. So again, really be in the moment with them when people share those stories with you. Challenge this whole colorblind ideology. I don't see color. I see everybody as being the same. The other hidden message is that I don't see you as a human being. We're all the same, and I don't recognize the history or your experiences because we're all the same. If I don't see color, then we're all the same. And that's another way that racism kind of manifests itself, by if everybody is okay, then racism simply goes away. Not true. Call out racist statements, jokes, the companies that you work for, the schools that you attend, having some conversation with HR people about what kind of opportunities are there for people of color. Be thoughtful in your finance, supporting organizations that do not, that don't support this ongoing oppressive system that we have. Agencies that outright discriminate against women or people of color or folks with disabilities, maybe organizations that I choose not to spend money with or to invest in. So those kind of things. And then adopt this intersectional approach in all aspects of your life, recognizing that all of the isms that we experience are all connected, and starting to look at the things that you experience as an individual through those particular lenses, and realize that racism is just one spoke in the wheel. And they're all kind of others, and they're all connected. So these are just some simple tips that you can just put into place today, kind of at the micro level. Also, when we start to think about sexism, we know that it comes up quite a bit, especially in the workplace, but there's some things that you can do as people who either witness or experience it directly, and that's being able to say something definitively. So the moment that someone says something that's uncomfortable or unpleasant, you need to make a statement. You need to let people know what is and what's not okay, and you can't do that in my presence. You need to be able to address it. Call it out when it happens. Let people know that you're uncomfortable with the way that they are speaking to you or about someone else. It's not okay. Don't assume just because you are in a work environment or you're with other people, don't wait for other people to speak up. Stand up for yourself. These are some ways that you can look at minimizing the frequency in terms of occurrence of people being involved in this type of behavior towards you. Surround yourself with good people, safe people, colleagues, because if you're in an environment that's supportive and understands the issues, then they're much more likely to support you through it, really giving you the ability to have the confidence to move forward, to speak up whenever you find yourself in a combating situation like that. So these are some things that you can do, kind of at the individual level as it relates to resolving some of these fairly complex system issues that we have. Now, at the community level, we take it up a notch. So there are some things that we can do as it relates to taking some action at a community level. So bear with me here for a second. I'm going to pull something up here that I wanted to kind of take a look at. But also recognize, give me just a second here. All right, here we go. All right, so when we look at acting, and I will, there's a link at the Southern, I want to say, Southern Leadership Conference that really looks at tracking hate. And so there are 10 ways to fight hate. We can talk about, there's an act. We need to act when we see or experience something. We need to join forces. We need to support victims. We need to speak up, educate ourselves, create an alternative, pressure our leaders, and stay engaged, teach acceptance, as well as dig deeper. So when we look at each one of these areas, when we recognize that there are hateful things, and unfortunately there seems to be on the rise the number of things that have been happening in our communities and in our world in general. So the first thing we need to do is act. So when there is a hateful incident that occurs, we need to deal with that situation. Being apathetic and only just adds fuel to the fire. So making sure that you understand that hate is an open attack on tolerance and acceptance. So those kind of conditions need to be condemned. It's also bad for the community's health, and it also escalates things. So some things that you can do in terms of action: you can sign a petition, you can pick up the phone and call friends, neighbors, community folks, talk to folks at church. You can repair hateful acts of vandalism that have happened in your community. You can make flyers. You can do a number of different things in terms of your part in fighting hate. You can also join forces, churches, social clubs, civic groups, kids groups, working with the police, working with media, making sure that you connect those particular organizations together when there's been a hateful incident that has actually taken place. Calling local law enforcement as well are all things that will be helpful for you. Supporting the victims. Victims of a target of hate need our support. So in whatever ways you can, be it personally, through social media, however you can, you want to do that. Report incidents, speaking to the press, research legal rights, and help people understand what they're entitled to if something has happened to them. Number 4, speak up. It's got to be exposed. So when you become aware of hateful things that have transpired in a work setting, in a neighborhood, you need to blow the whistle on that. The First Amendment gives you the right to do that. Talking to news outlets, using social media to put things along, connecting with reporters and editors at newspapers are all things that will be very instrumental in terms of resolving some of those issues. But again, connecting with media when you can are all going to be things that you will need to do in terms of that. Educating yourself. So we see oftentimes these groups are involved in these really heinous types of activities, but oftentimes we don't know a whole lot about those groups, where they came from, what do they stand for, so it would be interesting to know, like, how did the KKK, for example, get their start? What are their beliefs today? How common are they? those kind of things. So we know a little bit more about the situations that we find ourselves dealing with. That's going to be very important for us to do that. Educating yourself, knowing what hate crimes are, what a bias incident is, learning the difference, knowing the impact. Those are all going to be things that are going to be very helpful. Creating an alternative. So don't go to hate rallies. Just don't. There are different ways that if there's something you disagree with or have an issue with, there are ways to do it that doesn't necessarily need to manifest itself in a really hateful way. So look at what you can do in terms of that, or if you are attending, show love and making sure that you're on the opposite side of what hate groups might be looking at. I think pressuring leaders is going to be very important as well too. We have elected officials at county, city, state, and national levels, and they need to be the ones who enact policy changes and legislation that actually put an end to those kinds of behaviors. So every time there's an incident, we need to be on the phone, we need to be writing our Congress people, we need to be talking with county commissioners and et cetera, to let people know that it's their responsibility to address this issue in our community, and really putting the pressure back on them. Educating the community leaders about the impact of hate. They don't always know. And then also demanding a quick response. We need to not let something linger for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever the case may be, but demand strong statement also from your public policy officials. And encourage leaders just to name the name, call it what it is, instead of beating around the bush in terms of that. Push leaders when they're not responding, or when they show bias, or when they just fail to act. Those are kind of things that you can do at a community level. Staying engaged, promote acceptance and address bias before another hate crime can occur. So again, making sure that people understand, being a part of networks, a part of community organizing, creating comfort zones, candlelight vigils, interfaith activities, histories and anniversaries. All of those are things that you can do to celebrate and to make sure that you stay connected and involved when you are in this fight to really look at trying to eliminate hate. Teaching acceptance is a really important one. So I think that you learn yourself, but for those of you who have younger people who are impressionable, those of you who have kids, making sure that you're teaching acceptance, making sure that you're teaching people about the importance of difference and how it manifests itself and what that looks like. So, following up with the school systems to make sure that books and things that are happening in the classroom are culturally responsive. So, examining curriculum, looking at, encouraging kids to become activists. If things are not happening to their liking at their school, they need to have a voice so they can be trained in terms of how to resolve issues. And using inclusive language, I think are all very important pieces. And then finally, digging deeper. Look inside at your own biases and your own stereotypes. They have a place that they originated from. So really trying to understand what is it about that, and then joining into the change for systemic change are all going to be things that are going to be very important for you as you move through. So these are just 10 things that you can do at a community level when there's an incident that occurs, when there's a hateful process that is taking place. You can also take the basic format from these particular 10 items. You can apply this really to pretty much any marginalized group who are experiencing oppression, and utilize some of the same techniques in terms of moving forward. Now, at the macro level, and all of you all have probably by now have had at least one shot at communities and maybe have done a little bit of policy work, but also remembering your own training, remembering that you have some capacity as a social worker in terms of macro practice to look at these things here and where you are able to and where it makes the most sense for you to apply some of these skills in terms of being able to resolve some of the larger systems of oppression that continue to persist through these particular practice skills. So just keeping that in mind. When we think about the rate of poverty, we think about income gaps, we think about wages for women, we think about people of color, discrimination, and we think about any number of different things. We recognize that class and income inequality is a very real thing. And so some things that I think that you at a policy level can advocate for when you're looking at voting or when you're looking at having conversations with leaders in your community is these are some important things that will help in terms of resolving some of the issues around income inequality. And so they're here. You're protecting Social Security. You're looking at intentional fair housing policy. It's a shame that our country has the problems of homelessness and affordable housing. And so we need to look at, being able to influence policy that makes sure that there's an intentionality about making sure that fair housing policy is there. Affordable college, access to banking, community development financial institutions. So people needing to have the ability to be able to connect with those credit unions in their area to get projects financed, to get homes built, things of that particular nature. Expanding entrepreneurship. Also looking at modernizing labor laws. Some of the laws have been on the books for 50, 60 years and things have changed, and we need to make sure that we're looking out for the equity as it relates to the folks who are struggling to make ends meet. Access to health care, strengthening the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, protecting consumer financial protection bureaus, making sure that large corporations and organizations aren't just ripping people off, being able to create sustainable jobs and being able to have people to have the ability to actually build the savings and intergenerational wealth, home ownership, paid leave, childcare, ensuring that all pay, irregardless of anything, is equal for the same job that people are doing. Access and quality, affordable post-secondary education and workforce training. All of these are things that we can advocate for at numerous levels to make sure that we start to address some of the issues that plague us as it relates to really starting to resolve some of these issues of oppression. Keeping in mind, I know we've seen this slide early on, probably at week 2 or I think maybe or so, or 1, but this whole concept of intersectionality. So even as we look at different things that we can do individually, that we can think at the micro and meso level, we also need to understand that the forms of oppression are all linked. So they're all tied together. So when we start to think about how we advocate and how we plan to do things differently, recognize that they're connected. And so we need to think broader about what kind of things need to be done to ensure that the systemic injustice is actually quelled and we start to get to a place of social equity instead of inequity. So keeping that in mind as well too. Also recognizing, and this is another slide I know that we've seen some time ago, but again, this oppression, the cycle of oppression. So the things that we talked about that you can do individually or that you can do at a community level, when we think about this oppression cycle that's here in front of us, we can interrupt that process anywhere in that particular process. We can provide information and feedback for the non-target group to actually start to minimize some of the impact that it has on the target group. So again, wherever we can interrupt this flow of communication in terms of bad information being passed, mistreatment of people, then we need to educate folks on that and start to really address and reverse some of these cycles of oppression. I would also encourage you to do this, is to really think critically. In your shell, there is a critical thinking cheat sheet that I created for students years and years ago because people were struggling with this whole concept of critically thinking. And so as you see things, whether they be in the media, whether there be incidents that are covered or not covered, whether there's information that is given to you by people you know or by social circumstances, I would challenge you all to think very critically about the information that you are receiving. It's one way to really start to address some of these issues around privilege and oppression by really digging down and getting out of your own head and really start to think about, what is this information about? I'm going to have to evaluate what I hear. So if I hear someone say X, Y, and Z about this particular group, well, how do they know that? Is it their opinion or is it their belief? Is it logical? Is it relevant? Is it even reasonable? Is it rational for folks to come to that conclusion? Is this just rumor mill that's being passed on? Is there any fact to it? Those are ways that we can also think about, rather than having a knee-jerk reaction to things that we see and we experience, or information that's shared with us. We need to be able to discern what's real and what's not real. We need to be able to see the role of ideologies. And then also, once we recognize and we're informed, then we can make better choices about what we choose to buy into and what we don't choose to buy into. So again, just a few things to think about as it relates to how we can move forward in terms of starting to take some action, starting to have an impact on the future of our country and the future of the folks who are going to make our country great. So we need to be real mindful about that, but recognize that we do have a duty, we do have a charge that's been handed down to us, even in our own NASW code of ethics, in terms of what it is we need to do as it relates to social justice. So I hope that this class has been impactful, that it has made you think about things, and that you will continue, you will not stop. You will continue to research, and you will continue to read, and you will continue to explore your own biases, your own identity, your own origins, and then also looking at what's happening to people around you. Look at what happens to these various communities that have had these bad experiences. I think there's no substitute for continuing to learn, as well as it's a part of what we do at Scholastica. Love of learning is one of our 5 tenets. And so I would encourage you to continue to dig deeper, to look within yourself, to really think about what differences you are able to make at any level as it relates to making this world a better place for us all to be. So I thank you for your time, and I have enjoyed teaching this class. And take care and go out and change the world, because only you can do it.